this problem looks like a strange one. All right, why that is because they defined f of x to be these two functions that are multiplied together, x to the fifth times h of x. Then they gave us some information about h of x, or sorry, h of -1 and h prime of -1. We are tasked with finding f prime of -1. So as you can see from the definition of how they defined f of x, we have two things that are multiplied together. We have this function x to the fifth, and then h of x is a separate function. So I'm going to utilize the power rule as we get going on this and just write out the derivative using the power rule. So I'm going to treat that x to the fifth as being, I'm going to think of that as f, as it's written out in our power rule over here on the right-hand side. And then h of x, I know it's a little bit strange, but I'm going to call that g for right now, so we can kind of fill into the power rule as we take the derivative. So the power rule says f prime times g plus f times g prime. So our first function is the x to the fifth. We're going to use the power rule to go ahead and take its derivative. So we bring the exponent down and we reduce the exponent by 1. So its derivative is going to be 5x to the fourth, but then we copy down our second function, which in our case is h of x, right here. To that, we're supposed to add f, we simply copy down, so x to the fifth gets copied down, and multiply that by the derivative of the second function. So in our case, we can say that's going to be h prime of x. From there, we want to evaluate this at -1. So to do so, we want to plug in a -1 wherever we have any x's. So we say 5 times -1 to the fourth times h of -1 plus -1 to the fifth power times h prime of -1. From here, we can do a little bit more simplifying down and then use the information that was given to us at the beginning about h of -1 and h prime of -1. So the reducing down we should probably do is 5, and then -1 to the fourth power. We have 4 copies of a negative is going to make a positive, and 1 times 1 times 1 is always 1, times h of -1. We can replace that with 5, plus -1 to the fifth power. That's 5 copies of a negative is going to be -1 multiplied by h prime of -1. From the given information, we can replace that with 8. So we have 5 times 1 times 5 will make 25. And I'll go ahead and say minus 1 times 8 is 8, which works out to be 17 in our case. All right, so I hope this makes sense. Using the product rule, even though we have our initial function is defined to be this weird way with x to the fifth times h of x. And again, the f that I'm using here is simply the first function that goes along with our product rule over on the right-hand side. It shouldn't be confused with this function itself, f of x over on the left-hand side. Sorry about the letters kind of repeating themselves. Hope this doesn't confuse you too much. And g and h kind of being the same thing. All right, good luck.